Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our NSF Policy Update that we do annually to bring you up to speed on NSF policies and procedures. We're very delighted to be here today, and I mean that seriously. Our existing continuing resolution was scheduled to end on 8 December, and we're very happy to say we will be up and running for at least 2 more weeks as there is a new continuing resolution until December 22nd. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Jean Feldman. I'm head of the policy office in the Division of Institution and Award Support. And just a bit of logistical information before we get into the meat of the presentation today. We will be taking questions at the end of my formal presentation. However, you can ask a question throughout in the chat function on your screen, and I have 2 very capable policy office staff members, Samantha Hunter and Jeremy Leffler, who will be recording those and make sure that we'll get to as many of them as we can before we actually close today at 3:15. So what are we going to cover today? Well, actually, we're going to cover a bit more than what we typically cover in the way of the annual PAP guide revision. Of course, we will be going through the significant changes that will go into effect in the PAP guide, but there are a few other areas that we would like to go through and take this opportunity to address as part of today's presentation. The first one is one I would rather we didn't have to talk about at all, but it is one that after having 3 major hurricanes and wildfires in California that it's necessary for me to speak about today, and that's NSF's response to natural disasters. And so I'm going to provide you some information, just not only in terms of what we have done for the 3 recent hurricanes, but also just generic information for you on what should happen if you are impacted by a natural disaster. I'd like to cover, in addition, some policy office frequently asked questions. These are things we get every day to the policy office at policy@nsf.gov. We've picked out a few questions that we've been receiving a lot lately and that we hope will be helpful to clarify what NSF's formal position is on these questions. And then finally, I'm going to close with a document called the NSF Policy Newsletter. It is something that's come out in the last year or so. We've had a number of editions already, but it's actually a very exciting opportunity for you to hear more from us while waiting, in between waiting for going to an NCURA or SRA or COGR or CLASP or one of those sessions to hear about policy updates. So those are the topics we're going to cover today, and we look forward to hearing from you in the way of questions, what kinds of additional information we could provide to make everything clear during this presentation. So, of course, we again do have a new proposal on award policies and procedures guide. Of course, this document was released on October 30th. But as we follow NSF's customer service standard, we give you time to not only read the document, but also to disseminate it within your institutions, as well as ask us questions that you may not think you have the answer to in reading the actual document. So this particular PAP guide will go into effect on January 29th, 2018, and that is for all proposals submitted or due on January 29th, 2018. We are working heavily internally with NSF programs to make sure the funding opportunities have which PAP guide 17-1 or 18-1 will be in effect for a given solicitation. And so we want to make sure you're aware that we are taking care of that on the back end. We also are working with programs to ensure that there isn't a situation where we have perhaps a solicitation window which actually encompasses both PAP guides. So say it was released in the middle of January. That wouldn't be a very good situation if the end of the window ended in, say, mid-February, because that would cover then 2 PAP guides. So we are all taking care of all of that for you, and we wanted to just make you aware of that. So what are the significant changes that we would like to bring to your attention today? The first bullet on this slide is worth a little time and energy because this is one of the first times in a very long time that we've made some changes that are significant potentially for you in the way of eligibility. The first change is that we've actually not really added a new subcategory because colleges and universities are already and have forever been an eligible institution type, but rather we've added and changed the name to institutions of higher education. Obviously, statutorily, that is defined, and so that's really just a name change. So that's not really all that fundamental. What's more fundamental, though, is that we have added for institutions of higher education a separate bullet that addresses international branch campuses of U.S. institutions of higher education. And I should note that at the present time, that is really only impacting about 80 institutions across the U.S. that have opened branch campuses outside of the U.S. But that number is continuing to grow, and we were continuing to get questions about, how should these institutions be treated? And so for the first time, we've actually have coverage. To our knowledge, we are about the only U.S. federal funding agency that has addressed this issue. And so let me walk through what exactly the change is. So we have actually had additional language added to this international branch campus section that explains to you that when you are preparing your proposal, you must explain the benefits to the performance at the international branch campus and justify, and that word is important because you are going to need to justify in the proposal why the project activities proposed for the international site cannot be performed at the U.S. campus. So that's a justification that you may need to make that you have not had to put in your proposal before. So we very much want to make sure that you are aware of that. The second bullet has to do, and let me know before I leave the international branch campuses, that can be through subaward or consultant arrangement, and so that's pretty fundamental. We have not typically, in any of our eligibility to date, really addressed the issue of subawards or consultant arrangements. The PAP guide eligibility coverage was really addressed to the organization that received the direct funding from the National Science Foundation. So on the next bullet, we're talking about the eligibility of foreign organizations. And the language in the beginning is really not changed. We make it very clear that we rarely provide funding support to foreign organizations. And in essence, that really has not changed. What we are really doing, however, is clarifying what our expectations are of you if you happen to have a foreign organization via a subaward or a consultant arrangement where you believe they are essential to carrying out the project. Similarly to the branch campuses, our expectation to you now is that you explain why local support, meaning the international support, is not feasible, and why the foreign organization can carry out the activity more effectively. So typically in the past, the U.S. would fund the U.S. side of the collaboration, and the host country would provide the funding for any of the collaborators' work. So if you are going to get funding from the National Science Foundation to support that foreign organization, these requirements on justification are going to be fundamental for you to explain in that proposal. In addition, there's one more thing that has to be done. You must also demonstrate that one or more of the following conditions have been met. The first is that the foreign organization contributes, unique organization, facilities, geographic location, access to unique data resources that are not generally available to U.S. investigators, or other resources that are essential to the success of the proposed project, and or the organization to be supported offers significant science and engineering education, training, or research opportunities to the U.S. So again, this is not fundamentally changing how we're doing it. It is just rather identifying what the expectation is of you if you have a foreign entity supported under that proposal. We also, in the second bullet on this screen, received a number of comments through the comment process, both internally from our Office of the Inspector General, as well as from commenters in the university community that asked for us to reconsider the length of our budget justification. As you all are well aware, the budget justification is currently limited to 3 pages for the proposing organization and up to 3 pages for any subawardee identified on that proposal. The comments we received came along the lines of, if you really want for us to justify every particular budgetary component on that budget, we really need to have sufficient space to do so, and sometimes the 3-page is simply not sufficient for that purpose. And so we agree with you. We do want those budgets to be fully justified, and so therefore we are expanding in this new version of the PAP guide the budgetary page limitation to 5 pages. That, again, is the same in terms of content. You have the proposing organization has up to 5 pages, and any proposed subaward also has up to 5 pages. So let's talk about collaborators and other affiliations. We've actually spent a lot of time talking about collaborators and other affiliations over the last year or so. And what we actually did in April of this year was implement a pilot. And what that pilot did was provide a spreadsheet that you could use, and we actually asked you to use, to submit collaborator and other affiliation information. And it began as an initiative from a few specific programs to better manage the reviewer selection process. As you know, previously, they would upload a PDF file for each individual identified as senior project personnel. Well, through this template, they still uploaded this, but it allowed us to actually access the content or the information in that spreadsheet and enables our program staff a much better opportunity to review the content of those spreadsheets. So it does actually provide a much better searchable format for NSF program staff. Let me remind you that this template does not apply and will not apply to grants.gov submissions. And in those cases, you should follow the instructions in the grants.gov application guide. We now will make it, though, that what is in the template matches exactly the content of the PAP guide. We have made some adjustments to the language. We actually have coverage that we no longer ask for. This is deliberate, and we want you to give us what we ask for and nothing more. So that, we hope, will be helpful for you. We've also added some footnotes to address frequently asked questions, and we are currently developing a more expansive set of FAQs to address even more of the frequently asked questions that we are receiving in this regard. Now, if there are 10 or more individuals designated as senior project personnel on the proposal, or if you notice print preview issues when using the COA template, each completed template must be saved as a TXT file rather than the XLSX or XLS file. This enables the text to remain searchable, but we know and have learned over the past number of months that when there are over 10, there do happen to be problems, and we have come up with a solution to address that issue. So let's move on to the project description. Currently, we have a requirement that the project description must have a separate section labeled broader impacts. Well, obviously, we knew all along that PIs were already having an additional section to address the intellectual merit of that proposal. But now we are telling the PIs that you will have a label for the section entitled Intellectual Merit, and you will also have a label for the broader impacts. I'm going to talk later when I go more into the some of the things we're doing with proposal submission modernization, how that might actually be used. We also have made a change to results from prior NSF support. And for those of you who have been following the PAP guide changes for a long time, you know that practically every single year we make some change to the section results from prior NSF support. And again, with this year's edition of the PAP guide, that remains unchanged. So the language this year in the new edition of the PAP guide clarifies that if any PI or co-PI has received NSF with an end date in the past 5 years or in the future, they need to provide information on that award. And so the current language has start date language, so just know that we have essentially changed it from an award with a start date to an award with an end date. And so we just wanted to make you aware of that particular change as well. So let's talk about salary personnel, senior personnel wages and salaries. So many of the questions that NSF continues to receive on the NSF salary compensation policy continue. We still get, how does NSF define the year in terms of faculty salary? How many months can we have in any one year? We believe that the language is very clear on that. But what we have done this time is make it clear that it is an institution's responsibility to define what a year is. We had that language before, but we wanted to make it clear and remind you that it is your responsibility to define and consistently apply. We had initially come up with language when this was first implemented about it was based on an organizational fiscal year. And we were told by some institutions that really didn't work for them, and they had a better way of doing that. We are absolutely fine with that. All we are asking you to do is to define it and consistently apply across your university or institution whatever definition that it is that you do use. Our 2 months that you can ask for 2 months across all NSF awards in a year still applies. If you want more, you need to ask for more and you need to justify it. If that has not changed, but again, we consistently get comments on this, so it's worth noting again. And if the program officer approves, it would be included in the approved budget. So now let's talk about vertebrate animals. We've been addressing this issue in terms of changes throughout the year. And so what this slide provides to you is what we believe are really the significant changes that we have made with respect to vertebrate animal coverage. Over the last year, whenever you checked on your cover sheet the term that vertebrate animals would be used, the Division of Grants and Agreements has been adding a clause to every single one of those awards that says and reminds you of your institutional responsibility to ensure that any vertebrate animal work under the award has institutional animal care and use approval where required at all times during which that vertebrate animal work is being conducted under the award. Failure to comply with this condition will result in suspension and or termination of the award. We've been putting that language in there. We wanted to remind you, and we've put in the PAP guide the actual language that will now appear or now appears in every single award when you check that vertebrate animal box. We also wanted to address for you NSF's policy regarding changes to protocols. And what our guidance now stipulates is that additional IACUC approval must be obtained if the protocols for the care and use of vertebrate animals have changed substantively from those originally proposed and approved. So we got questions throughout the year on, well, if it changes, do we automatically have to give you new additional IACUC approval? And we made it clear as you do if there is a substantive change from that which was originally proposed and approved. Similarly, we received a lot of questions on what happens if that award receives a supplement. Supplements in and of themselves do not require a separate IACUC approval unless, again, along these same lines, the scope of the project has substantively changed from what was originally proposed and approved. If it has substantively changed, then a new signed IACUC approval letter is required, and you would provide that to your grants officer. I'm now going to talk about changes that we've made in the area of human subjects coverage. Obviously, like the vertebrate animal area, we receive questions throughout the year, and we always take those questions that we've received and say, what is it that we can do to our existing policy so that folks don't have to ask those questions? And so that's what we've done here on human subjects as well. Whenever you check human subjects on the cover sheet, the Division of Grants and Agreements will put that human subject language reminding you of your responsibility that there be institutional review board approval in place at all times that the human subjects research is being conducted under the award. We've also added language on the post-award responsibilities similar to that of the IACUC language, reminding you that you do have to provide us with new IRB approval if the protocol has been I can't say that word today, substantively changed from that originally proposed and approved. I am drinking iced tea. This is not bourbon. That is not why I am having trouble saying the word substantively. We also have had language about supplemental funding. Again, you don't need to provide us a new IRB unless there's a substantive change, in which case you still have to provide us then a new signed IRB letter. So let us talk now about an area that's very near and dear to my heart, because it's an area that I have been working on personally very hard over the last number of years. We have removed from the PAP guide in this new version, Exhibit 7-1, which was a compilation of all grantee notifications and requests for approval from the National Science Foundation. And you may say to yourself, well, why would you ever want to remove that? That was an extremely useful document, and we found it very valuable having a cheat sheet, if you will, that we could tack up and know what all of those requirements were in one place. It actually had some additional language on where it was covered in the PAP guide and who actually was responsible for taking action, the program office, DGA staff, etc. So what we're here to tell you, and what the primary point I'm going to talk about, is the fact that we have removed it because we have an even better document to provide to you. And that's a document that are identified as part of the research terms and conditions implementation in the way of Appendix A. So I'm going to talk about that in a moment. The grantee notifications are still contained in Chapter 7. You will notice, and you will know already through many years of working with the uniform guidance, that there are really no notifications as such in the uniform guidance, and so we continue to summarize those for you in Chapter 7. We've also removed some coverage from the allowability of cost chapter. The reason that we removed some sections from that coverage is because when we reviewed it, we realized NSF is adding absolutely no additional coverage than that already addressed in the uniform guidance. And what we are trying as an agency to do is have you use the uniform guidance is the backbone. And it is absolutely through the PAP guide how NSF implements the uniform guidance. But if we're not providing any value added and we're simply repeating what's in the PAP guide, we don't believe it. We would rather you just use the coverage that is in the uniform guidance. So let me now turn to the document that I was so happy to be able to talk about, and that is the research terms and conditions. Why we are now pointing to this document is because it does have not only the small number, really, of notifications and requests for prior approval, but it addresses every request for prior approval and addresses, number one, how the research terms and conditions deal with it and where it is addressed in the research terms and conditions, but it also addresses NSF's position on each and every one of them, whether they're required or whether they're waived for every single mandated prior approval. This is very helpful for you because not only does it have NSF, but it has the Department of Energy, the National Institutes of Health, USDA NIFA, Department of Commerce, which consists of NIST and NOAA as part of this implementation, and NASA. Many of you may have noticed that there are 3 organizations, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Transportation, FAA, and EPA that are not currently on this slide. Both of them, all 3 of these organizations, rather, we had hoped would be implemented by now. We have been informed by these organizations that for a number of reasons, they have been unable to complete their implementation. So at the present time, the agencies identified on here are the agencies that are currently using the research terms and conditions. So stay tuned. We will be sending out more information when we do hear from those other 3 agencies about what their implementation status is. So I'd like to change gears a bit and go into a little about NSF's responses to natural disasters. And as I opened, there clearly have been 3 major hurricanes and other natural disasters that have occurred over the past few months. What we had done in the past is often issue important notices, dear colleague letters, and the like on each and every one of them. What NSF's important principle for you to understand is that NSF for many years has had a policy on what happens if you are impacted by a natural or anthropogenic event. And every time one of these events occur, we at Policy, at the Way of Policy at nsf.gov, receive emails. Are you going to send something out on that? We get emails from program officers. Are you going to send something out on that? And the answer is we already have. It's incorporated in Chapter 1F of the PAP Guide. And that's the important takeaway that we want you to have from this. And program officers already have wide latitude to make adjustments as necessary. So if you're an affected organization and you're impacted by one of these events, you need to contact the program officer, and sometimes it is after the fact. Sometimes you are not able to do it in writing. We get all that. But it gives you the instructions on what it is that we expect you to do. We often accept rapid and eager as well as supplemental funding requests to existing awards. In the case of most of these natural disasters, and we certainly have done so for each of the 3 major hurricanes. I would also like to point out to you something that occurred as part of Hurricane Maria. For Hurricane Maria, the Graduate Research Fellowship Program actually extended the deadline date for both applicants and reference writers to Friday, February 29th at 5 p.m. Submitters' local time is determined by the applicant's mailing address. And so this is for individuals located in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And so if you need to, and we definitely feel everything that you've been going through at the National Science Foundation, and that's why this adjustment was made. However, if you've got severely damaged power, water, communications that make it impossible for you to even meet this deadline, you need to email grfp at nsf.gov and make them aware of that situation. So unless you receive that waiver from the GRFP program, You need to submit by that December 29th date for those located in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. All others must submit by the published deadlines. Again, and one more takeaway point is that you may no longer see separate DCLs that address, hey, this natural disaster has occurred, here's what you do. We really want you to use that natural disasters page. We've also set up an email alias, naturaldisasters@nsf.gov, that is monitored by the entire policy office. And if you need to do so, please send any questions to that particular site. So now I said I was going to address some of the questions that we received most frequently throughout the year that we continually get over and over again. And I'm going to do it on participant support. We spend a lot of time. I had a Spark session at the Incura conference on participant support. I thought 5 people would show up. It was standing room only. We're thinking that we're putting out this information, we're answering questions. All of these questions have gone away, but clearly they've not. And so we did an article in our newsletter on this, and I'm going to go through again some of these questions right now, hoping that we will begin to eliminate and have everyone understand what NSF's official position is on these issues. So the first question is, may I include conference speaker fees in the participant support cost section of the budget? I almost laugh because I have had 3 of these questions in the last 3 weeks. The answer is no. The participant support category is for participants only. Any speakers are not supposed to be put on the participant support line. They're not the people that are being trained in the conference or training activity. So that's the answer, no. If you have an issue at NSF, I have said this many times, and people are taking me up on the offer. When they get something from a program officer that says, you know, those speaker fees, I see you've budgeted them in other direct costs. They don't belong there. They belong in the participant support category. What I do is I walk to the appropriate floor in the building. I go to the division director. I shut the door, in which case they say, oh no, what has happened now? And we have a little discussion. And then your PI, maybe that day, maybe a few days later, gets an email from their program officer saying, I was mistaken. The speakers do not go on that line of the budget. So we're trying to get that straightened. The next question is, we would like to rebudget our NSF award to move funds out of the participant support category. Do we need NSF approval to do this? Yes, you do. You've had to do so for over 20 years. While we provide broad rebudgeting flexibility, except in those identified in the terms and conditions of the award, you have to receive prior NSF program officer approval, written approval, to reallocate funds out of the participant support category. Now, one point I'd like to make here, though, is you may, however, rebudget funds into the category unless it's the other category, the other of the participant support line item, and then you have to have prior approval for that as well. And that is clearly outlined in the terms and conditions of the award. The next question, are costs such as room rental fees, catering, supplies related to an NSF-sponsored conference considered participant support costs? No, they're not. They are not and shouldn't, and the participant support cost line should not be used for such costs. In many cases, you have to separately negotiate contractual arrangements with the hotel or the organization providing those conference rental fees, catering supplies, et cetera. And so those would go on another part of the NSF budget and not participant support. We also have questions, do participant support costs apply for all participants, or are they only apply for non-awardee organization participants? Well, the answer is they apply to all, from the proposing organization and from other organizations, if they truly are participating in a conference or training activity. May human subjects that are being paid as survey takers be considered participants? The answer to that is no. Participant support section of the budget shouldn't be used to provide incentive payments to research subjects. Those would be included on the other line, or the other line of the other direct cost part of the budget. And indirect costs should be calculated on the payments in accordance with your federally negotiated indirect cost rate. Another question, is it acceptable to categorize students as both employees and participants in an REU if the appropriate determination is made? The REU program is different. We tell you that in the REU solicitation. We're very clear about that. They are not going to be an employee and a participant at the same time. For an REU participant, per the solicitation, they definitely go under the participant support category. But we've also been receiving a more generic question, though, on is it always the case that an individual cannot be a participant, and I'm going off script here, so people are going, there's not a bullet on here, Jean, what are you doing? But this is a question we've been receiving a lot. Can a person only be an employee or a participant, and that is it? There are no exceptions. And the answer to that is, with everything at NSF, there actually are some exceptions. And let me define when that might occur. We've had some questions come in that say, we have a student that works in food service, or they work in groundskeeping, or they work in the library. They would never have anything to do with an NSF grant, but they're paid as an employee. Can they be a participant under this conference or training activity? If that is the case, for an individual who would never in any other way, shape, or form be associated with an NSF proposal, we would not stop them for being a participant in that context. So we're going to write up some language on that because, again, we've been receiving it. So the vast rule is, yes, that you can't be an employee and a participant at the same time. But for some of the questions we've been receiving, we want to make it clear that that's not the case for an individual that just would never simply appear on an NSF budget in any way except in this particular scenario. So now I'm going to turn gears a bit, and I'm talking about modernizing account management at NSF. Within this building. This is something that we lovingly call single ID, but that's not really what we're doing here. So we have come up with a way to really explain more effectively to the to our community what we're really doing here. And so we're calling it modernizing account management. And when you typically think of NSF's experience, you think of logging into various NSF systems And for every system you log into, you may have a different ID, and you may have a different password. So we're trying to change all that. We're trying to change it so that each user should really have only one NSF ID. Many PIs are used to going from this institution, transferring to a new institution, getting a new ID. That's not what NSF wants. We want, per individual, one NSF ID. And in this new system, we've never had a way within the system to enforce that requirement, though. So within the new system, there's going to be a centralized login location, and individuals will manage their profile and roles for the various types of requirements. So you're seeing how we would like it to be for this new modernizing of account management. This new registration site is currently being developed, and it would allow individuals to create and self-manage their accounts, including their roles, including their profiles, a central location to access NSF systems, provide administrators the ability to manage the roles for their organizations and the ability to approve, disapprove, assign, and remove roles for their organizations, and replace what's existing now in Fastlane and research.gov in the account management functions. So it's really, I said it was being developed, it's really been developed. We're really currently conducting usability testing, and it will be implemented in phases in the first quarter of calendar year 2018. We already did an ERA forum on this topic that had many people sign in. We plan to do, like we always do, a lot of outreach with regard to this issue. Again, we're just giving you a teaser here on something that really is coming and that we believe will make your lives a lot easier. Another topic that we'd like to address that is in the way of coming soon is proposal submission modernization. And I know that folks have seen a slide like this for about 2 years now. And I know you're saying, you know, we're really getting, we know it's a multi-year initiative to modernize the proposal submission capabilities currently in Fastlane and implement these in research.gov. You know we've been talking about that. You know we have already moved most notifications and requests, all project reporting, much of the award cash management system, that's already been moved from Fastlane to research.gov. And we've been talking to you about what it is that we have been doing over the last few years to develop this new capability within Fastlane. Well, we didn't want to just take what we have in Fastlane and move it over to research.gov. We wanted to take advantage of the fact that we were looking at this to take a fresh look at it. So we want to make sure that what we're doing is reducing administrative burden associated with the preparation, submission, and management of proposals. In 2017, we are focused on completing the proposal section modernization concepts that incorporate feedback. We have done multiple ERA forums on this. We have briefed this at multiple sessions of the Federal Demonstration Partnership, giving folks the ability to say, here's a screenshot. Here's what we would be doing on this screen. Please give us your feedback. And we have been reading, considering every single comment that you've given us. And so I'm very excited to say that in 2018, we're going to begin the use of research.gov to prepare and submit proposals to the National Science Foundation. As part of this, we wanted to also make sure that we increase the efficiencies in this proposal preparation process to the extent that we possibly could. We wanted to increase the data quality as much as we possibly could. And we want to improve it in a way that we can capture data in a way that allows us to do some really wonderful data analysis on our end. So I'm going to show you a few slides that are mock-ups of something that you will be seeing in the near future in the way of proposal submission modernization. So when the PI comes into to create a proposal, you're going to go through a setup wizard that's going to start asking you questions. These questions are going to help drive what you end up seeing on future screens. When you see this create new proposal, you also see on this navigation the life cycle of what we'll be going through. What funding opportunity are you submitting to? What organization at NSF are you applying to? What type of proposal, and this is the screen you're seeing here, are you submitting to? What type of submission is it? Is it a preliminary, is it a letter of intent, preliminary proposal, full proposal? These are the kinds of things that we are going to be asking you to help improve your user experience. So on this slide, you see that we're asking you to select what type of proposal will be used. And you see a number of boxes. You see research, rapid response proposals, early concept grants for exploratory research, our RAISE proposal, research advanced by interdisciplinary research and engineering. You see our goalie. What's fundamental about the box that you check here is that it will directly impact the screens that you see in the future, because every different type of proposal has different requirements. We have been trying in our outreach to emphasize the importance to you of what we've been doing with those proposal types, because with each proposal type, then we have developed a set of compliance validation requirements to ensure that you know exactly what you need to submit to NSF for any given proposal. So in the case of the next slide, you picked research, and you are going to see only on that middle screen what you need to see or what you need to submit as part of a research proposal. If it was, for example, a conference grant, you would not see a references section required, because that is not the required part of a conference proposal. So again, we are hoping that through providing this information to you, it gives you on this screen access to all of the parts of the proposal you have to complete. On the left nav, you will see Manage Proposal, and that gives you the opportunity to manage all the personnel, and I'm going to show you that in another slide. And it provides you the opportunity to add and remove co-PIs, senior personnel. And so, again, we are trying to help drive you through a process where you know exactly what NSF's expectations are of RU when you are completing a proposal or preparing a proposal to NSF. So let me give you an example, another example of the managing of the personnel. So this is being done, again, On the required side, on the left nav, are all of the required components. For our first issuances, we are focusing on a research proposal. In future issuances, we could actually target it to a given solicitation. And if that particular solicitation in the future, not in the original issuance, but in the future, if it required, for example, a management plan would come up under the required document screen, so you knew exactly what you had to submit for any given submission to NSF. So on this screen, let's look at it a little more closely to see what some of the benefits also are here. Now, those of you that do submit via grants.gov, this concept is a little similar to how it is in grants.gov, in that for each individual that we identify, we have Dr. Hodge, a principal investigator here from Kansas State University. And instead of going to 3 different screens to complete their biographical sketch and upload it, their collaborators and other affiliations and provide that information and upload their current and pending support, you will do it from one location. You also will get immediate checks right there of compliance. And on this screen that you will see a current and pending support, and you will note that there is an error. So right away, not waiting to when the proposal is being submitted, right away you will know that Dr. Hodge has an issue with the current and pending support part of that proposal. So I really believe that it's much more intuitive. It will be much more helpful to a PI to know exactly whether they are compliant or not. And we are looking forward to getting feedback on that as we move this out. There also on this screen is the project summary screen. And on this particular screen, you will see some different types of errors that you may not have seen in the past, because we've always told you that we have been doing compliance checking for a while now on whether it's one page or not, or whether you have separate headings for overview and intellectual merit and broader impacts. But we will now be doing additional compliance checks, and you're going to see some warnings or errors that you haven't seen before. So, for example, in this particular example, the very first error says your file contains an unallowable font type. We can now go within that upload and see that you have included a font that is currently not permitted by the National Science Foundation. And in the PAP guide, we identify what those allowable fonts are. In the very beginning release, I can warn you now that we will only be permitting Times New Roman, but in future releases, we will be adding those other categories. We also have a third error on this screen that you also will not have seen before. Your file contains a left document margin that is less than 1 inch. Please update your document and try uploading it again. So again, all through this process, we're going to be letting you know whether you're compliant with what our proposal preparation requirements are, and letting you know that, provide that information and address it immediately. Here is the last screen that I am going to show you in proposal submission modernization, and that is the budget. And it is a major shift from the existing way it's done in the current FastLane system. All of the totals are dynamically summed and displayed as you make edits. There are live validations performed so that only appropriate data can be input. You can expand and collapse parts and sections of the budget. And you also will note that you can see on this particular screen more than 1 year at a time. And we believe that's also going to be very helpful for you. All senior personnel are automatically added through the Manage Personnel module. They're displayed here. However, remember, NSF's cost-sharing policy. You cannot identify an individual and not identify any time associated with them. So there will still be the capability for them to be taken off of this budget and then to be addressed in the facilities, equipment, and other personnel part of the proposal, as you would do right now, and you would identify what their role is in that particular part of the proposal. In the future, we will support a file upload from a template as well, but again, that's going to be one of the future releases that you're going to see as part of the proposal submission rollout. Now let's talk a little bit about timing here. There is already a video demonstration available online of our fabulous Bill Dawes, who's the program manager for this. And it walks you through a lot more than the screens that I have just shown you right now. We will be doing a soft launch in early 2018, making it possible for you to see the screens, to do everything you want to do in every possible screen, with the exception in the first release, in the system. But the only thing in the very beginning it will not permit you to do is to actually press that submit button. So you're going to have some kicking of the tires opportunity for a few months, and then we will actually launch the system. But it will not be required, so don't have people getting very, oh my heavens, this is something totally new and I'm going to have to use it. It's going to be optional. Grants.gov and FastLane will still be available. And as you'll note in the third bullet, in the very beginning, and again, we're going to be addressing these in later releases, but in the very beginning, it will be only for non-collaborative research full proposals. So that means if you have a proposal with a subaward, or it is a separately submitted proposal, in the very beginning, you will still have to use FastLane to submit those proposals. We are extremely excited at NSF to really be able to provide this this release to you and let you kick the tires a bit. Again, we have all along throughout this couple-year process been providing you the ability to see things as they've been developed. So this is already considering a tremendous amount of customer feedback or user feedback, if you will. But this is exciting to be able to move it from something that we're simply talking about to something that we're actually doing. So the last slide that I'm showing you is the proposal and award policy newsletter. Again, very exciting to talk about. We've done these, we've done a few of these already. It is a fabulous way to stay abreast of policy and procedural developments. We discussed in the past ones participant support. Many of the questions that I've covered here, if you read that newsletter, you would have already known the answers to many of them. Collaborators and other affiliations. We have been getting a lot of questions on that. And we used an article to let you know what some of the questions were and what some of the answers were. The last issue contained articles covering all the PAPPG guide changes that I just discussed, as well as articles on human subjects, collaborators and other affiliations, faculty salary, and project reporting reminders. So this is a really fabulous way. The next version I've just reviewed and signed off. It will be released on Monday. I'm very excited to be able to talk about it. So before you start sending 500 questions to policy about how you sign up for it, I'm going to tell you that right now. You go to navigate to www.nsf.gov. You click on the envelope. Yes, I'm reading this, so I make sure I get it absolutely right. You click on the envelope icon under the Follow Us header to receive information about the Proposal and Award Policy newsletter. You got to make sure you click on the following boxes: newsletter/journals and publications, policies, and procedures. And that will make this Proposal and Award Policy newsletter automatically delivered to your inbox whenever a new one is released. So that covers the content. We always end with Ask Early, Ask Often. And now we're going to move into the Q&A part. I have busily been watching the folks back here as questions have come in. And so we're going to make sure that we answer in the next 10 minutes or so, roughly, what questions that we do have. So I now turn it over, and you won't see him, but you will hear the voice of Mr. Jeremy Leffler, who is the outreach coordinator for the Office of Budget, Finance, and Award Management. Jeremy.
Thank you, Jean. And we have been getting a lot of questions, and I just do want to reiterate that this presentation is being recorded. Everything that you've heard today will be available on the Grants Conference website shortly, and we'll let everybody know who signed up to participate that it's there. So let's get into some of the questions that we've been receiving, and I'll just go with the first one that we received was, are indirect costs allowable on a conference grant, and is there a reduced rate that should be used?
Well, as you know, as part of a conference, you may have a section on participant support costs. And if there are, as part of that conference or training activity, participants, you may not charge indirect costs on that category. But on every other category of that budget, you would be charging your negotiated indirect cost rate. So it's a little nuanced response, but the fact of the matter is you often do have a participant category. You cannot charge on that, but say for that conference, you have some speaker costs. As we've already addressed in the earlier part of this presentation, you would be putting those on another part of the budget, and the applicable indirect costs would be put on the budget associated with those costs.
Okay, the next question that we have is, do you know why some programs do not use the PAP guide format for collaboration letters? It sometimes makes it difficult for compliance at an institution.
Yes, let me explain to you what we've been doing very briefly. I took my glasses off because I don't need to see anything, and I can answer this without them. The fact of the matter is we put out a pilot in April. At the time the pilot was released, there were a few programs that already had developed very specialized instructions for how they wanted the collaborator information to be submitted. It was so close to the deadline date that we did not believe it was appropriate for us to change those particular solicitations at that time. However, moving forward with every particular solicitation, and remember, we only use solicitations if we're deviating from the PAP guide or adding supplemental information. And so we look for that. And we make sure that it is using the basic template information that is currently required. And we are currently assessing that very closely. Whenever one comes through and asks for something different now, the vast majority of cases, we actually say, absolutely not, you're still going to have to use the template. So over time, you will be seeing fewer and fewer of those templates that deviate from what we currently ask for in the PAP guide. And it will be only for a very rare situation, and we will explain to you why it is that we have to use something different. But we understand this issue. We knew when we implemented the pilot in April that we wouldn't immediately catch everything that had already had specialized language in it. And so we have been slowly addressing that over time.
Okay, the next question that we have goes back to your guidance on participant support. And the question is, are there guidelines defining the roles of employee versus what an employee is versus a participant?
We absolutely leave that to an institution, because that is not something, and the variance from organization to organization does absolutely change. And so from one institution to another. And so we are asking, that's going to be a responsibility for you to determine their role on the project, whether they are, for example, it comes up most frequently in undergraduate students and graduate students, where they would typically, in any other scenario, they're in an employee situation, they're conducting research on the project, and you would say they go in the top part of the budget or the personnel part B of the budget. But then you get a response back from program that says, no, put it in participant support. We are saying to you, use your determination, and we're helping to back you up on that. We're asking, unless it's REU, for you to make that determination. We know that when we tell you to move someone from one part to the other, there could be IRS implications, and we never want to get between your institution and the Internal Revenue Service. We are not H&R Block. We will not go defend you in front of the IRS. So that's an institutional responsibility. So no, we cannot, there is not a specific, this is an employee and this is a participant.
Okay, the next question is, would it be acceptable or allowable to have no time or salary budgeted for senior personnel?
You mean on the, I have to ask, on the budget? The reality is NSF's policy is clear. You cannot put a person's name or with no time, because why? Because that violates our cost sharing policy. You cannot have voluntary committed cost sharing, and as defined in the uniform guidance, that is something on the budget that commits time for that individual. However, NSF's policy is that you can have as much voluntary uncommitted cost sharing as you want, but you don't put it on the budget. If you put it on the budget, it would be voluntary committed cost sharing, and you would have violated NSF's cost sharing policy. Similarly, let me answer, because I have the mic, another question we get. We want to put a lower indirect cost rate than our negotiated rate on the budget. That also violates our cost sharing policy. So we are here to tell you what the violation is with respect to a budget. Back to the original question, have I seen a lot of proposals that had absolutely no one on them? The answer to that is no. Often, at least on Part B of the budget, there are categories of individuals identified, whether it be graduate students, postdocs, undergraduate students, technicians, et cetera. So you're asking for somebody and an amount of time for them. So the overall answer is, again, we've got to factor into this the cost sharing policy, and that's where this question gets, the implications are the most significant.
We have one more question, and that is with respect to vertebrate animals. Do you have examples of how you would define substantive changes?
We never define substantive changes. That would be a very dangerous situation, either for whether it's a change in scope. Now, very, very likely there is a process with your IACUC to determine that. And we would request that you work with any given IACUC if you have any questions on whether it does reach the level of substantive. But NSF's position is sometimes a very small change can have huge implications. So for change of scope or objectives, for things like vertebrate animals, human subjects, those are things that NSF doesn't have absolute definitions for. And it would could potentially be very dangerous for us to do so. So with that, I thank you all very much. As Jeremy said, this will be available to you, and we hope that you found the information useful. For any questions that were not able to answer today, policy@nsf.gov. With that, thanks very much and have a great day.